Good day, this is Terry Difazio, bronze medal winner in the Terry Difazio Lookalike Contest, and you're watching Soundcheck. Today on our show, we're going to be talking about the 50s, and of course, my guest, the very talented and incredible Todd Pronto, having just busted up some of the best Holiday Inns in New England.
I took second place in the Terry Difazio Lookalike Contest. Actually.
The only reason he took second because he couldn't quite match the beard.
Yeah, I can't. I got a little bit of pepper when I grow it out, but I mean a little bit of salt, more pepper. Right?
For those of you who don't understand that joke, back in, I think it was the 20s or the 30s, I can't remember which, Al Jolson was touring the West Coast. He stopped into a San Francisco opera house, and they were having an Al Jolson lookalike contest, and he came in third. So, and that was a joke behind that. Anyways, we're going to talk about the 1950s, the music of the 1950s, something that Todd is very familiar with and likes a lot. And I grew up in the 50s, and I hated it a lot. So it ought to be great.
We'll have to agree to disagree.
Yeah, exactly. But first of all, before we get to that, we want to make mention of something that very sad that happened over the weekend was the death of Keith Emerson from Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Yeah, I was surprised about that. I mean, I didn't know the guy, but last person you would have thought, I suppose. But
yeah, according to the story, he was having trouble with his right hand. He was getting, I don't know, some sort of a, he couldn't use his right hand to play piano anymore.
Yeah, I don't know if it was arthritis or what, but that, I guess to a musician, if you take away that, what do you have left?
Yeah. I guess he had become extremely depressed, and he took his own life. He shot himself.
Yeah,
which is a tragedy. But then again, I really don't think that I don't think that would drive me to killing myself.
No, I mean, I don't know how old the guy was. I know he was
He was 70.
70. I know he was still, wasn't he scheduled to play a show like next week or this week or something?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, there's even the speculation that, Robin Williams was developing Alzheimer's disease.
No.
And some think that had something to do with his suicide as well, because he was having a harder time remembering scripts, and whether that's true or not, we'll never know. But it is sad. And Emerson, Lake and Palmer, though not a group from the 50s, is a very, I would say, underappreciated group.
Oh, definitely, I'd agree with you.
They're a fantastic group, but you don't hear about, when you hear people talk a lot about the great music over the decades, you don't really hear them.
I think they were probably too progressive.
Yeah, it's kind of like, what's the other group I'm thinking of? The Moody...
Moody Blues?
The Moody Blues. They're kind of the same way. They're great too, but they're kind of underappreciated.
Yes was another band like that.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Most of your really ultra-progressive bands don't get a lot of airtime because their music is too complicated.
Yeah, and it's too complicated. It's not poppy. It's not quick. I heard a great quote is from a singer-songwriter named Jason Isbell. And he was talking about country music, but I think it applies to all music, and especially pop music that we're spoon-fed. Oh, yeah. And we've been, it's nothing new. We've been spoon-fed pop music for years and years. Like, if you look at the charts from back when the Rolling Stones and the Beatles were, out, they weren't always number one on those charts. You had, like, the Monkees and the Herman's Hermits that were number one, and the Rolling Stones were in the top 10. But
Freddie and the Dreamers. Yeah,
you're always going to be spoon-fed this homogenized cookie cutter crap. And Jason Isbell, they were doing an interview, and they were talking about the writers in Nashville and how the writers are just writing these songs that are garbage and just to make money, and how Nashville has ruined country music, and I think this applies to everything. Jason said, no, you know what, Nashville didn't ruin country music. there are plenty of good places to get a burger in town here. Nobody's forcing you to eat McDonald's.
Right.
And and I love that quote so much because I think that just encompasses all of music. There's plenty of good music out there, and we're really lucky that we have the internet to discover it, because if you are spoon-fed, this cheap crap, I feel sorry for you, because there's so much more to discover out there than... Well,
Todd brings up a very good point here. And since I'm just a little older than Todd, just a little, maybe a year or two.
Year or two.
When I was growing up as a teenager in the 60s, you would hear a lot of different varieties in the top 40. Mm-hmm. You could hear anything from Cream to Jimi Hendrix to Steppenwolf to even some of the most homogenized stuff like Petula Clark.
Yeah.
Or there was another one there, Barry Sadler's Ballad of the Green Berets. You could hear all of that in the 60s. By 1970, it was all gone. Everything became extremely homogenized. You would hear the Cowsills, the Partridge Family, the Osmonds, and you would just hear the same cookie cutter, poppy stuff. 1910 Fruit Gum Company. It was just, it
yummy,
just got to,
yummy, yummy, I got love in my tummy.
It just got to be absolutely horrific. And your good bands, like Todd just mentioned, Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Yeah.
Deep Purple, Black Sabbath.
Sure.
Bands like that didn't get a lot of notoriety. As a matter of fact, Deep Purple had to sort of make a cookie cutter type of song, and they finally got them some recognition. Smoke on the Water.
Yeah.
If you
the first song that every guitarist learns.
Yeah. And it's a decent hook.
It's a great hook, and it's really easy to play, so anybody can learn it real quick.
Yeah, I know. I'm just wondering if the guys that we're going to be talking about, some guys from the 50s.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if that's what they had in mind or what they were actually trying to do, because it would be interesting to find out what it was they were trying to. Were they just trying to make a few bucks, or were they really trying to pioneer something new? Because by the 1950s, radio had really gotten stagnant with the music. People like my parents, who were still listening to Guy Lombardo and Gene Krupa and Tommy Dorsey and Jimmy Dorsey and the Andrews Sisters, people were getting kind of blot out with that stuff. That was the World War II music and before World War II music.
Yeah, it was kind of like Frank Sinatra was the biggest rock star in the world until rock and roll came along. And then Frank Sinatra had a really hard time. He resurged in the 80s and, of course, ended up being a living legend. But a lot of people don't realize that Sinatra almost went bankrupt a few times. And that's after being this huge star, because, before rock and roll music, Frank Sinatra was Elvis, I guess, to say.
He had a big hit in the 60s, I remember.
Yeah. Yeah, it was sometime after the 60s where he started to fall from grace a little bit. Yeah,
and even Sammy Davis Jr. had to sell out and make the song Candyman, because he was bankrupt.
That's right.
And he said, I wasn't going to do a song about a stupid Candyman. They offered him $1 million, and he said, okay.
I'll do a song about a Candyman. Juju Fruits? Okay. Yeah, it's I don't know what a lot of the artists in the 50s were thinking. I think you have your certain, you've got Elvis, who obviously was about making money, I think.
His management definitely was.
His management, it might not have been Elvis so much as his management making him. But I think you have guys like Buddy Holly that were really about innovating music and really trying to... The thing is, before Buddy Holly died, he had kind of separated himself from rock music, and he was writing stuff with orchestras in it.
Really?
That we never really got to hear. He was kind of like being Frank Zappa before Frank Zappa had a chance to do it. But then he died, so it never materialized. But so I would say he would be somebody that was a creative force behind the art. But a lot of the stuff in the 50s, though, it was really feel-good, fun music. You didn't have a lot of people pouring their hearts out in lyrics like you do. Yeah,
the first one that I remembered, as far as I think, and if somebody has different information, I'd like to hear it.
Sure.
But to me, the band who sort of invented rock and roll was Bill Haley and the Comets.
Yeah. Yep.
That seemed to be very radical.
Yeah, they had the upright bass. The bass player was standing on the upright bass, riding it around like a cowboy, Yeah, and I think Bill Haley, he was kind of pushed aside when Elvis came out, but they used to call Bill Haley the undisputed king of rock and roll.
Right.
Because Elvis, of course, was the king of rock and roll.
And many people think that Elvis invented rock and roll, which he didn't.
He did not invent rock and roll. And I don't think Elvis ever said that he invented rock and roll.
No, he didn't.
I think
He
people
didn't.
just put that moniker there. It's like saying, Jefferson Airplane invented acid rock. They didn't.
No, but they certainly
identify
did,
with
they,
it.
they certainly did enough acid.
They certainly did enough acid. Yes, they did.
Just if you could ever ask Grace Slick. She had her own. She had her own that she liked. I think it was Orange Sunshine is the one that she liked.
She had her own brand, kind of like Willie Nelson is trying to get his own brand of marijuana.
Yeah,
now.
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, and Jimi Hendrix, of course, had his own personal brand of acid. That was Purple Haze was made for specifically for him. But Bill Haley had a very, very unique sound when it came out. I believe 1951 or 52. But like I said, I don't know exactly the dates. I could look them up.
I think. I don't know if he invented rock and roll music, but he definitely started bringing it to the forefront. I think the old blues and jazz guys really in like Chicago and the African American culture in the 50s really invented rock and roll. Mm-hmm. And us white guys stole it and made it our own. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a bunch of uncredited people, and I think it's probably like that through all of music, a bunch of people that go uncredited but inspire these people. Like Louis Armstrong is known as one of the huge jazz trumpet players. Buddy Bolden was his mentor. Nobody knows who Buddy Bolden is because they didn't have any recordings back then.
Yeah, well, Elvis took a lot of songs from black artists from the 40s and 30s. Hound Dog was not his song.
No, none of them were.
Yeah,
I think Elvis has like 1 or 2 writing credits, and that's it.
Yeah, and he didn't actually write them himself. He collaborated.
He collaborated with some
most
people.
of his music was written for him, or it was taken. And it was interesting to notice this. I didn't realize this either, but the Beatles and the Dave Clark Five did the same thing. They took artists from the 40s, black artists, and they redid some of these songs. Like Twist and Shout was not written by the Beatles.
Oh, no, not at all.
Do You Love Me by the Dave Clark Five was not their song.
Yep.
They copied it, and I didn't find this out until many years later. But to be thankful for the internet and various things like that, you don't have to be stuck with the normal homogenized junk that gets played on Top 40 or even adult contemporary.
Yeah.
Because you can go on to Pandora, and you can plug in any old type of music, genre of music, or band, and you can access tons of stuff.
1930s Zydeco.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised at all the stuff there is. Not that I totally have listened to Zydeco music. I love it.
One of the bands that I've talked about once or twice maybe on the show, Nightwish.
Yep. Once or twice.
Maybe
3 times, but I don't want to exaggerate.
Possibly 3,000 times.
Possibly.
You go into Pandora, put in Nightwish, and you know what? You will find 24 other bands just like that, and that's how I discover some of these bands.
It's a great way to. That's how I discover a lot of new music.
And it's nice that these artists aren't totally beholden to record companies anymore. They can produce their own stuff if they want.
Yeah, there's a shift. There's a huge shift happening right now that you've never had before. Like you mentioned Elvis, like Colonel Tom Parker was behind Elvis just driving out hits, and that's why Elvis started making movies. Horrible movies. Yeah. I don't know anybody that would say they saw an Elvis movie and thought it was good. But and I don't even think Elvis thought he was that good of an actor. But that's back when people started realizing that they could make money and the record labels controlled so much. What happened though, you always have Bernie Sanders talking about like no bank is too big to fail. That's what happened. The record labels got too big, and they failed because once people started putting music online. The record companies only make revenue from the records that they sell. They don't make revenues from the songs. The publishers make money from that. They don't make money from live touring. The artists make money from that. So record labels signing bands for $3 million, that doesn't happen anymore because they're not going to make that $3 million back unless you get Taylor Swift, who's like the only person that can still sell millions of records nowadays.
Yeah, it's... I think it's fortunate in one way that the artists have more control over their own destiny.
I do too. The unfortunate part is society hasn't really gotten up to speed with that. And what I mean by that is, even though an artist can produce their own record now and distribute it online and distribute it however they want, it still is an astronomical cost to record a really good produced record. And that's where the record labels came in. They used to sign somebody for, say, $300,000. That $300,000 paid for their recording, it paid for their hotels where they were touring, it paid for everything. They had to pay that money back to the record company before they started making money. So if you're going to produce a really high, I mean, anybody can buy a laptop and a music program and produce it in their bedroom and have it sound good. But if you're going to produce something that commercially sounds great, you still have to spend the money on the mixing and the mastering and the microphones. And unfortunately, it can cost thousands of dollars to record a good album, and people are going to listen to it free on the internet, and they're not going to invest. It's not like when you were a kid or when I was a kid with CDs where you'd buy the record, though vinyl is coming back.
Yeah.
You don't go out and buy a record or a CD anymore and spend your hard-earned money on it, and you're invested in that album. You listen to it over and over and over because you bought it. Now you can just go on your phone and say, I want to listen to whoever, and I don't think the connection with the music is what it used to be because of that. So it's great. The great thing about that is they're not behoved to record companies, so they have complete creative control, and they can actually make a good album, because record companies would homogenize a lot of crap.
That's what Eric Clapton said. That's what happened to one of his favorites that he sponsored, Doyle Bramwell III.
Yep.
He said this guy, the record companies would say, just churn this thing out, and they would give him, a couple of days, get it out, get it fast,
Yeah, it happened a lot. Bands would come in with their album, and the record company would say, there's no way we're putting that album out. And they'd have to go back and write some poppier. It's not. Music is a form of art, and art is best when it comes from a creative and inspired place. It's not best when it comes from... If somebody sat down with Vincent van Gogh or Picasso and said, you need to create a painting that's going to make me $3 million, go. Do you think Picasso would have made a great painting? He would have been trying to think, well, what can I do that'll make...
Yeah, let's paint a horse.
Let's paint a horse. Let's paint something that's going to...
A covered bridge.
Yeah, something that my buyers can sell. Instead, Picasso was just a nut job and painted all this crap, and he probably died... Well, Picasso might have had a little bit of money, because Picasso was around... Didn't Picasso die in the 60s?
Yeah, somewhere around there.
But you go back to the Renaissance period, all those paintings that we idolize, Monet and Van Gogh and Renoir, and they were all dirt poor, just as was somebody like Beethoven or Mozart. They weren't. Those guys were actually like the rock stars of their time, but they didn't have the money that. Yeah. They didn't have.
Now,
they didn't have 50 cent money. Let's put it that way.
Just think if they'd had the internet.
If they had the internet, yeah. Beethoven's leaking his Fifth Symphony on Twitter.
Yeah, that would have been something.
You guys should hear this. I can't. Hashtag music problems.
You started talking about Buddy Holly, and I saw the Buddy Holly story, and I don't know how much of it was accurate. Do you know?
Not much.
No?
No.
Did he actually have a fight with his record company?
He did.
Or not? Yes. And he didn't want to be. From the movie, it said that I don't want to be backed by a hillbilly band.
Yes.
Is that, and then that's what they wanted him
That
to do.
That is true. Yeah, he didn't want to be a country musician because country music was popular at the time. He wanted to do rock and roll.
Mm-hmm.
Though he was kind of rockabilly.
Mm-hmm.
The one main thing that movie got wrong, aside from casting Gary Busey as Buddy Holly, they had him playing a Fender Telecaster in the movie, and Buddy Holly played a Fender Stratocaster, and that's always bothered the crap out of me.
Yes. and some of us can tell the difference.
There's a huge difference in the sounds of those guitars. Had Buddy Holly wanted to be backed by a hillbilly band, he could have played the Telecaster, but the Strat was...
So he played a Strat?
Played a Strat through a 1950s Fender Champ amplifier.
Oh yeah. Speaking of how things go around, Joe Walsh's Rocky Mountain Way was done with a Telecaster and a Champ.
Yeah. Those little Champs, man. They were these little... I saw one this weekend. I went into an electronics store in St. Johnsbury, and it's not for sale. The guy just has it sitting there. It's wrapped in leather. It's this tiny little amp with a 6-inch speaker. I mean, that's what those guys were playing through back then.
And with today's technology, you don't need a whole bunch of amplification because of the way recording technology is.
No.
For example, in the 60s, when Cream went into a recording studio, they brought all the amps and they turned them up loud.
Oh, yeah.
And they knocked people's socks off.
Yeah.
But you don't need to do that.
No, not anymore.
No.
You can make a... you can get apps on your phones that simulate any amplifier you want, and you can plug it right into the recording console. I tend to hear the digitalness in that. I've done it. I'm not going to lie and say that I haven't done it, but there's something about getting a real amp. But yeah, you can just, a microphone like what you're talking into right now in front of a small little amplifier. I mean, Frank Zappa used those pig nose amplifiers, the little practice amplifiers.
Yeah.
He used those on a ton of his records because he liked the sound of them.
Yeah.
He couldn't do it live. Now he could.
Yeah, you could now. As a matter of fact, they probably do.
They probably do.
Yeah. I know that the way miking techniques are now, most of your bands, when they go on stage, they don't use a whole lot of stuff on stage. Once in a while they do, but generally they don't.
No, if you go, you can type, I think it's Guitar Player Magazine that does it, and they'll usually talk with a player's guitar tech about their road gear, and they'll show you the whole thing. And it's always a bunch of pedals in this, the pedals that they use to change their guitar effects, in this rack, and their guitar tech is the guy that switches it. They don't actually have them on the stage to stomp on like people at my level do. You don't have that luxury. That goes underneath the stage to their amp that's actually microphoned, or mic'd up, sorry. If you see a bunch of amplifiers on stage, they're empty cabinets, and they're just there for looks.
Yeah.
With the exception of AC/DC.
Yes, you were telling me about them. Yeah.
my friend does sound in Boston, Massachusetts, and they set up AC/DC. Angus Young had a tractor trailer truck just for his Marshall cabinets. And John, well, I guess I let the cat out of the bag. My buddy's name is John. He was telling me how most of the time all those cabinets are empty and they just stack them. These are all daisy chained together, and they don't use in-ear monitors. They use stage monitors. But he said it was the loudest concert he'd ever heard, and it just absolutely rocked. And if you were following the news last week, they I said Angus Young, but that's not the guitarist, is it?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
What's the lead singer's name that sounds like he's constipated?
Brian Johnson, yeah.
Brian Johnson was just told by the doctor to cancel a bunch of tours last week because if he doesn't be careful, he could lose his hearing completely. Yeah. AC/DC just canceled 10 shows. That's why. Yeah. But he just said at AC/DC they don't use any guitar effects, pedals, or anything. It's all amps. It's called breaking an amp when you play through a tube amp where you turn it up to a certain extent and it starts to distort.
It's overdriven.
And that's AC/DC sound. It's about 70 Marshall amplifiers, enough to fill a stadium, just all overdriven with a guitar plugged into it.
Yeah.
Bad.
Yeah, and I will bet you they probably have a line array PA system as well.
They do, and he has... he was laughing because normally if this is your stage, this table that I'm sitting at, if this is the stage right here, the sound guy would be sitting right in the middle to get the mix. But because of how loud they are, the sound guy's actually sitting over where you are so he doesn't get completely bled out by the sound of those speakers.
Yeah. A lot of these bands have that problem. In the 50s they didn't, obviously.
No, but they were playing like high school, like North Country Auditorium. That was like the size places that the guys in the 50s were playing a lot of times.
Yeah, or
gymnasiums.
Things like that.
They weren't playing the Bridgestone Arena or anything like that.
Yeah, I remember watching an interview. They had these two junior high girls, and I don't know how they ended up doing this, but they ended up interviewing Tommy Aria of Slayer.
Yeah.
And they were asking him questions. When he said, "Could you please speak up? I've lost some hearing over the years."
Yeah.
And if you've ever seen or heard Slayer, you'll know why.
Oh, yeah.
I will bet you their amps are turned on.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. It's crazy. It's pretty neat what they do now. I mean, I've seen Brad Paisley, who's a country guy, but his whole stage is just a stack of Dr. Z amps with white grills on them. And the reason is they project video off it. And those stacks are nothing more than empty cabinets. He's playing through probably a 15-watt Dr. Z amp that's underneath the stage. And that's what he's actually playing through.
Yeah, your sound systems now are so good that, and matter of fact, this is actually somewhat good for the artist, and I'll tell you why. Is because you don't have to be subjected to that kind of sound pressure level. Yeah. Since the PA system is usually in front of you, so most of the noise is going out front.
Yeah, it's always louder for the audience than it is the musician.
Yeah.
I learned that in high school the first time we were playing at a club in Burlington, and we have our monitors on the floor that are pointing back to each other. And, you know, each musician gets like, I wanted the drums and the bass more in my monitor, and the guitarist wanted nothing but guitar in his monitor because that's how guitarists are. Yeah. And, and I dove into the crowd. And when you break that plane and suddenly you're not behind the speakers anymore, it's like 10 times louder than what it is up on stage for you. It's insane.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, because you've with most bands, you've usually got 10, 15, 20, sometimes 30 microphones.
Yeah.
And it's going through a very, very large PA system.
And it's all...
And the ones today are so much more powerful than they used to be, you know.
And they're behind it all, so what you're hearing out in the crowd, it's not that loud for them.
What were some of the other bands in the 50s that were somewhat popular? I'm kind of drawing a blur because towards the late 50s, things got fairly stale. After Bill Haley and after, I affectionately call him Pelvis Presley.
Pelvis Presley.
And Buddy Holly, things become a bit of a blur because they got quite homogenized towards the late 50s, early 60s.
Yeah, they did. I mean, you had like Carl Perkins, and you had...
there was the Big Bopper.
Yeah.
Jerry Lee Lewis.
Jerry Lee's career ended through only fault of his own.
Yeah.
It didn't really have anything to do with the music.
Right.
Yeah, all that
He's
stuff.
coming around again. I saw him on TV, on the Access TV a little while ago.
He's still going. I don't know how old he is, but...
Oh, Little Richard was another one.
Richard, yep. A lot of that stuff. I mean, you know, Jimi Hendrix used to play guitar for him.
Yeah, I heard that, yeah.
Which is just crazy.
Yeah. Jimi Hendrix also played for Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels for a while.
Yep.
That was a good band from the 60s.
You had Chubby Checker and you had Bo Diddley. You had all that stuff, but then by the 60s, like you were saying, that's when the British invasion came in. That's when the Beatles came over and the Stones, and then you started getting crap like the Monkees and the Partridge Family, and that 50s era died probably just as fast as it came in, but it was completely innovative because that's where they figured out that if you turn your amplifier up enough, it crunches up a little bit. And,
Yeah, to me... from what I can recall, by the late 50s and early 60s, you ended up with bands kind of like Pat Boone. I do remember Joey D and the Starlighters.
Yep.
And I do remember, oh gosh, there was another one like that too. It escapes me, but it's with Pat Boone and all of them. Oh, the Dovells was another one. Yep. They were starting to become very homogenized, and it wasn't until the Beatles hit things got reinvented with the Beatles.
Yeah,
in my opinion. And the Beatles, to their credit, they actually reinvented rock and roll twice.
They did back in the late '60s, early '70s. Yeah. They started getting a little
acidy.
Yeah, I always have this argument. Yeah, I always have this argument. There's the classic argument. Are you a Beatles fan or are you a Rolling Stones fan?
Yeah.
And Terry's neither.
I have to admit the Beatles wrote much better music.
That's
far better music.
That's always my argument when I say the Beatles, and a lot of my friends say the Rolling Stones because the Rolling Stones rock harder. But here's the thing. If you were stuck on a desert island and you could only bring one band out of those two's entire collection with you, the Beatles are going to give you a lot more variety. The Rolling Stones were really good in the early 60s, and then they've sucked ever since.
Yeah.
Subjectively. People like Start Me Up and all that stuff. I don't.
Yeah.
I liked, As Tears Go By and Paint It Black and
those were pretty good. Yeah, I agree.
But that's when they were creative. But the Beatles, I mean, they were playing tapes backwards and they were putting orchestras in. And
Sgt. Pepper was so far ahead of its time.
Yeah.
That it was so far ahead of its time that the Who decided to copy it, and Pink
Right.
Floyd,
and
bands like that.
Yeah, my argument will always be the Beatles wrote better songs.
Yep.
The Beatles were much better musicians. The Rolling Stones are horrible musicians.
Yes.
They're out of time. They're out of tune most of the time. They don't do harmonies. The Beatles had the harmonies. They wrote the songs. They changed with the times. They didn't just stand still. And we were talking about this off the air a little bit.
Yeah.
If you don't change, what was that quote that you said?
That which does not change dies.
Right. And the Beatles, the Rolling Stones didn't die. They look dead.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
and they pretty much sound dead.
Yeah. If you go see the Rolling Stones today, you're seeing the same exact concert that you would have seen in
1970.
the 70s. Yeah. If the Beatles were all still alive and you went to see them today, it would be Paul McCartney played a cigar box guitar massively distorted through an amplifier with the members of Nirvana a couple years ago, and it rocked.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Just that evolution. So that's always been my argument, Beatles or Rolling Stones. The Beatles win hand down every time, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Technically, ethically, emotionally, musically.
Yeah.
Better looking.
Yeah. You can't argue with that one, guys. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I mean,
one of their members was assassinated. Come on. How more rock and roll is that?
Yes, and one died of cancer.
Ringo's never going to die. Mark my words. Ringo Starr will be the last surviving member of the Beatles.
Definitely.
Paul McCartney's going to go first.
And even the Beatles, however, were writing music that they couldn't even play. They had to have help on.
Absolutely.
There was a drummer that came here to Newport last year.
Bernard Purdy.
Yeah. And he was talking about all the different bands that he worked for, fixing up studio stuff. The Beatles was one of them.
Yep.
And I read the article in Mix Magazine in 1983. Yeah. I wish I'd have kept the darn thing because I would have had him autograph it. Yeah. But there were things that the Beatles were writing that they couldn't play. They were just it was even over their heads.
It was all about production.
Yeah.
That's why they stopped touring. They stopped touring for two reasons. One, because the girls were screaming so much they couldn't even hear themselves play. And
now, in today's world, that wouldn't happen.
That wouldn't happen in today's world.
We would just turn up the JBL line array systems until everyone was deaf, and they'd have to stop.
Exactly. But that was one of the reasons, and the other reason was because they started writing. If you listen to the White Album,
yeah,
I don't know if Bernard Purdy worked on that album, but I would guess that might be around the time, maybe Revolver.
Yeah,
but they started getting very complicated, and a lot of that stuff nowadays you could duplicate live because you can have some of it on tape loops and run it back. But back then you couldn't do it live.
Yeah, I think Sgt. Pepper was the first one.
Yeah, Bernard Purdy might have played, he played for. Oh man, he was so cool to talk to because he played with James Brown and he played
Steely Dan.
He's played with everybody like that guy, and he is great, isn't he?
Yeah, he was. He mentioned one drummer that I remembered, Billy Cobham.
Yeah,
and Billy Cobham was an interesting drummer in that he would play. See, I was a drummer, and when you played, I played crosshand with a match grip. Now, Billy Cobham would play this way on the left side and this way on the right side, and the reason he had to play this way is because they wouldn't turn his drum kit backwards. He was actually left-handed. But I don't know why that would have bothered anybody because Ian Pace is left-handed and they turned the kit around for him.
Yeah, you see a few left-handed drummers here and there. Not as many, though.
Ian Pace from Deep Purple.
Yep.
A very, very good drummer.
Wasn't Tony Iommi left-handed, too?
Yeah, left-handed guitar player.
What a backwards band they were.
Yeah, you're not good.
I'm a left-handed guitar player. I can't say anything about it.
Jimi Hendrix was left-handed.
Yeah, Paul McCartney.
Yep.
The Beatles. See?
Left-handed bass. And
there's another argument against the Rolling Stones. All right-handed.
Yeah. And another guy, I can't think of I only know his first name. His left-handed bass player's name is Doug, and I can't think of his last name for King's X.
Yeah.
Very good bass player, very good singer.
Yeah.
Excellent singer if you're ever into King's X.
Yeah, I haven't listened to them forever. But yeah, getting back to the 50s, that it's kind of interesting too because it wasn't like we're mentioning drummers' names and bass players' names. In the 50s, you didn't do that. It was just
it was the singer and the guitar player, maybe.
Yeah, nobody knows who Elvis's guitar player is.
I don't know.
I do. His last name was Burton. What's his first name? It's not Tim Burton.
And it wasn't
James Burton was Elvis's guitar player.
Okay.
And Chet Atkins did a lot of the early stuff.
Oh, Chet was good. Chet was very good. Les Paul was good. He came out of that era also.
Love Les Paul. A lot of the innovation in the studio started taking place in the 50s too, though. Chet Atkins was one of the ones that was behind that. He was more in Nashville for that sound, but that's when they started realizing how to do like cave reverbs and plate reverbs. I
remember the thing on it was on a show called My Place on VPR, and they took Dwayne Eddy's twangy guitar and they took a microphone and put it at the end of a culvert.
Yeah,
and they played at one end and they put the microphone at the other end and they got this nice reverb sound. That's how they did it back then. And then somebody decided to make spring reverbs.
Yeah,
and that was cool. Now it's all digital. You don't even need that anymore.
Oh yeah, I still like the Capitol Records building in LA, the one that looks like a stack of records.
Yeah,
they're known for their reverb because in the cellar there's a chamber that they made where when you sing into a microphone, it goes down into that cellar and comes through their speakers, and then it's mic'd again in there where the reverb is, and then shot back up to the control room. And apparently that is one of the best. They call that echo reverb or chamber reverb, one or the other. That apparently is one of the best in the world. And they're worried about all the shifting in California. There's the land shifts whenever there's earthquakes, that it could ruin that because it's in the basement. And apparently that's one of the most sought after natural reverbs that you can record in. But yeah, other than that studio, I don't know of many others that still have a room where they're sending your voice to be recorded, or spring reverbs, or any of that stuff. It's all pretty much digital plate reverbs now.
Yeah, and one of the reasons too digital had to come about was because live spring reverbs would pop and crack and bang and you'd be in the middle of a song, and the next thing you know you've got all this. And the only one that I ever heard that actually used it to their advantage was John Lord of Deep Purple on his Hammond C3 organ. He'd take a running jump and he'd land on his Hammond organ, and you hear the springs crash. And he's the only one that ever used that to his advantage.
That's funny. Yeah, I have a 1972 Trainer spring reverb amplifier, and I have a 1968 reissue Fender Princeton, and they both have spring reverbs in them. And if the amp's on and you set it down, you hear it. You know the sound I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah.
I don't even know how. It's like a echoey crash sound.
There's two songs you can hear it. The studio and live version, especially of Highway Star by Deep Purple. Right at the end, they let out a crash with that thing. Live even more so than the studio. And in the 20-minute version of Space Trucking live, you'll hear John Lord go nuts on that thing.
Does he?
You'll hear crashing and banging with that. Deep Purple had a way of taking total cacophony and making it sound good.
Sure.
I've never heard a band do it quite like they did. And I'm not even sure.
The Who kind of did that.
The Who did that, but Deep Purple did it with a keyboard added.
Yeah, that is true. Floyd didn't really do that.
No, Floyd was a very trippy sort of a band. I have to admit, I saw their tribute band, and it's amazing.
I want to see that the next time they come around. I've watched them on PBS. They have a whole. It's probably the same concert that you saw, because I think it was filmed that same year.
It was very similar, and I have to admit, it was one of the best shows I've ever seen.
I'd totally go see it if they came back. I'm a huge Pink Floyd fan, but
any other bands in the '50s that stick out with you?
Not really. Those we've kind of mentioned all the real big ones. I'm sure there are that we're just not thinking of.
And like with any other type of music, as the decade wore on, it started getting very sort of homogenized again. Things started moving in a very homogenized direction. For example, like I said, by the time it got down to Pat Boone and the Dovells and some of those bands, there was not any new innovation. It was just regurgitated pop to make money.
That's when corporations ruin absolutely everything when they get involved with art, because they knew what was working for Elvis and they knew it was working for Buddy Holly, and they said, let's emulate that. and like we'll make tons of money if we get somebody that sounds like them. Never mind letting somebody come up with their own sound and innovate. It's all about money. It's a great John Lennon quote. Is he said, music belongs to the people. Only publishers think that they own the music.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a very true statement.
Yeah, in the 1981 magazine, I used to get, I don't think it's around anymore, it's called Recording Engineer Producer, Ron Nevison, who was very, very big with Geffen Records when David Geffen still owned that.
Yep.
He said that at the time, 80% of the record companies in America were owned by accountants or lawyers who know absolutely nothing about music.
No.
But they know business, and that's it. Yeah. And unfortunately, if you were a band and you happened to have Ron Nevison as your producer, you got a darn good producer. He would produce he produced some Cozy Powell albums, if you remember Cozy Powell and Michael Schenker Band, bands like that, stuff that was off the beaten path, not stuff that you're going to hear every day.
And in keeping with the way record companies did that, radio did the same exact thing. And radio was kind of cool in the 70s when FM came out. But in the 80s, corporations started taking over radio stations, and they were lawyers, like what you're saying. And they brought in these focus groups. And radio stations figured out what women between the ages of 18 and 35 wanted to listen to. And the reason they figured that out is because when you get married, you usually get married between the ages of 18 and 35, and you start buying your first house and your first refrigerator and your first stove and your washer and your dryer, and the woman usually facilitates that in the marriage, convincing the man that I want this nice avocado kitchen stove. And that's what happened to music industry, is it became a demographic. And they started programming music for that demographic. And I wish I was making this up, but I worked in radio for like 12 years, and I'm not making it up.
Well,
that's why classic rock stations don't exist around here, because there's not a big enough population, because the people that fall into classic rock demographics are Terry's age. And Terry already has a house and a stove, and he's probably not going to be buying another furnace.
Or having more children.
And that's very true. And that's why, when people say, well, why doesn't Moo just become a classic rock station? And the answer is because they need to sell advertising. It's not about the music, folks, as much as you'd like to think it is.
No.
Nothing's about the music. The only person that is the people that write the song.
As a matter of fact, the only classic rock station that I can tell you right offhand that I used to listen to was in Claremont, New Hampshire. Q106, WHDQ, Claremont, Lebanon, New Hampshire.
And they're big enough to support that, but they also own 4 other radio stations in that same building, the ones that make them money: country and adult contemporary.
Yeah, and I'll tell you,
and sports.
Some of the best music I ever heard came out of Q106.
They're still cranking.
Yeah,
but I'll tell you what, and I actually used to work for the company that owns them. Now owns them. They didn't own them back then. Q106 isn't supporting itself. It's the country station and the pop station. I think it's called Frank, but it's not called. Is it Frank?
Yeah, my wife and I just saw an Eagles tribute band, and that was put on by Frank.
Yeah. Those are the stations that are keeping the radio stations in business. But when you're in a bigger demographic, then you can afford to appeal to the masses, because there are people that will advertise on classic rock stations, just nowhere near what it is. But that's what happened. And so they got these focus groups, and what they would do is they'd pay people in that demographic to sit in a room, and they'd play them songs. And based on how they voted, that's how they would build their playlists. And now it's even worse than that, because in the entire United States, there are 50 reporting stations. Those are the ones that report to BMI and ASCAP and CSAC and Billboard to give you your top charts. And out of those 50 stations that claim to know what women between the ages of 13 and 35 want to listen to, all the other radio stations study their playlists. And it's all based on numbers. And it has absolutely nothing to do with if that new Taylor Swift song is good. It has to do with how's that chart placing and how's it going to place tomorrow.
Yeah, and
sucks.
Here's something, and this is to back up what Todd is just talking about. I'll go first to 1980, 81. I had my own sound company. I used to spin records.
Yep.
We were playing a dance marathon in Springfield, and the program manager, station manager for WCFR Springfield, Vermont. Mm-hmm. One of the top 5 worst stations you'll ever. Anyways, I won't even go into the poison pen letters that I wish I'd written them. But anyways, their director was John Frawley, mm-hmm. and I would put on a song, and he'd say, "Nobody wants to hear that," and I would literally have the place rocking. I'd put on Rainbow, I'd put on Judas Priest, and I'd get those people whipped into a frenzy. And he's there. I know what people want to hear, and they will listen to what I tell them to listen to, and that is true.
Right.
Second point, 1972, I was my former fiance Kathy, who was going to school in Manchester, New Hampshire. I'd go down and visit, and while she was in school, I would be waiting for her. I went to a place called Manchester Music, mm-hmm. and I walked in, and I was talking with this guy, and we were just shooting the breeze about music and how homogenized it was getting. He said, "You want to hear something interesting?" He said, "I called the radio station and asked them to play some Savoy Brown. They said, we don't play that. Nobody listens to that." So he waited about a week or two. He called the radio station and said, "Hi, this is Bob from Manchester Music. Mm-hmm. We're selling a ton of Savoy Brown records. We can't keep them in here. Everybody's buying Savoy Brown." So the radio station started playing Savoy Brown. And the next thing you know, they're selling a ton of Savoy Brown records.
That's brilliant.
So who is really Dumb and Dumber here?
I don't know. It's that quote that we said before. There's plenty of good places to get a burger down. No one's making you eat at McDonald's.
Yeah.
People do. People like McDonald's. People like to be spoon-fed stuff. It's not right or wrong. It's personal preference, and it's what you like. But people ask me all the time why I don't DJ. Like, why don't you become a DJ and DJ weddings and stuff? Like, because I hate that music, and I won't play it. And you guys will hate me as a DJ because you're going to ask me to play the YMCA, and I'm going to say, I don't have it. And when you're a DJ, you have to have the YMCA.
Yeah, I did that from 1978 until 1984, and that's what I ran into. For a while, disco was popular, and I could put up with that because I could make decent money at it.
Right,
And then when disco went out, and I had my heyday for about 4 years, I was playing AC/DC, I was playing Van Halen, I was playing rocking stuff from the 80s.
Then Michael Jackson came along.
Yeah, and what was the other one? Boy George.
Oh, all that stuff in the 80s.
Spandau
Huey
Ballet.
Lewis in the News.
Actually, Huey Lewis wasn't bad. I could put up with him.
I like him. I like Elvis. I mean, Elvis. I like Michael Jackson, who wanted to be Elvis.
Yeah. He almost pulled it off.
He almost did. He was close.
He was close.
He married his daughter.
Yeah.
I guess. That's what they say.
I think that was a big money deal.
Oh, gosh.
That was to launch both of their careers.
Oh, it has to.
Absolutely. That was so put on.
It's funny that Michael Jackson's a great person to talk about when he, of course, in the Jackson 5 was huge, but when he launched his solo career, it was all about money. Like, how much money do you think Michael Jackson made for that record label? How much money do you think Michael Jackson made for Pepsi before they tried to burn him?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We could have conspiracy theories about that too.
We probably could. This is I don't know if it's Paul Simon that said this, and he said the music is great. The music business sucks.
Yeah. Oh, he's right. Yeah.
And he's very right. It's the music business that's horrible, and it's always been that way. Even in the 50s, when we're talking about Buddy Holly and Little Richard and Jerry Lee Lewis and Chubby Checker and tons of great music. Mm-hmm. But that's when it all started. That's when the big money started getting into it. And
well, your mass media started then too. I mean, television became huge. Yeah. Radio was huge, and then it sort of tapered out, and television sort of took over. Now today, even though radio and television is still fairly huge, now you've got competition from the internet.
It is, though. In 20 years, what's television going to be?
We're not even sure television may be around.
I don't think television.
I'm actually surprised AM and FM radio is still around, but it is.
It is. AM has morphed over mostly to talk radio at this
sports,
point.
Yeah.
And sports. And FM's still hanging in there. The smart FM stations are the ones that are going back and not doing what I was talking about with all these focus groups. They're the ones, the smart radio stations are going, okay, we have satellite radio and we have internet radio where people can listen to commercial-free music, whatever they want, whenever they want, uncensored. So now we have to be local again, because radio stations really got away from being local. And so the good FM radio stations that are saving their butts right now are coming back into the communities, and they're starting to play local bands, and they're starting to get involved in local events. But that's going to die out eventually, and you're going to be able to do everything on this. You already can do everything on this. You can drive from here to Boston and listen to Pandora on your phone. You don't need to switch between radio stations anymore. So it's eventually going to die.
And I believe Pandora is going to be an option in new cars as opposed to what XM Sirius is. Yeah,
Pandora is already and has been for a few years, but it's going to be pretty standard. Sirius is starting to lose contracts. Sirius had contracts with Chevy and Ford, and they're starting to lose those contracts, and Pandora is starting to win. It's all a guessing game, but I would say in 10 years, television is not that influential to the younger. Right about where my generation is where the cutoff is starting to happen.
Right.
Some people in my generation are still getting their news and their sports and everything from television, and everybody older than that, to my parents and up. But as they start dying off and my generation starts dying off, the generation behind us, they don't need TV. They don't need the radio. It's going to be a huge ball, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens with music, because when you turn on the television and you see the same Lady Gaga and Taylor Swift and I don't know, like The Weeknd and Kendrick Lamar and all these people that are popular right now, constantly.
Miley Cyrus.
Once you stop seeing that every time you're trying to watch The Big Bang Theory, you know what that means, though? That means that the internet and all those pop-up ads that you hate right now, and all the focused advertising, like if I email Terry about a cool a video camera, the next like with my emails, if you're logged into Gmail, and I know you're not a big Google person.
No.
If you're logged into Gmail and I start sending you stuff about Panasonic video cameras, well, I'm going to start getting ads popping up on my Facebook page and any other page that I'm logged. That's all focused towards you. The ads that you're seeing on the computer are very different than the ads that I'm seeing, and it's going to get worse.
You can get rid of them at least.
You can get rid of them. But
on TV, you can't get rid of them.
Right, and it's going to get worse as TV goes away, because, that's going to be where you need to advertise.
Unless you're watching Showtime or HBO, you can't watch a movie on television without seeing 1,000 commercials.
Oh, edited for content. Whose content?
And the only advantage to having commercials on your TV is so you can go to the bathroom or get a sandwich.
Absolutely.
Other than that, useless. Totally useless. Because most of the commercials aren't funny, they're not innovative, and they make you look. They're talking to you like you're a blithering idiot.
If I see that puppy monkey baby commercial again, that if I had stock in Mountain Dew, I would pull all of it. I hate that commercial. That commercial is the worst commercial ever.
Even our engineer is laughing.
Yeah, you've seen that commercial, right?
Yeah, just once.
What is that?
No.
I don't even know what the product is because I hate the commercial so much.
Yeah.
If I saw a puppy, a monkey, and a baby all together in a parking lot, I'd go the other way.
I'd report it to the police.
I certainly wouldn't buy any Mountain Dew products.
Wow.
But yeah, it's called the business for a reason, and the music business started probably in the 40s, but it really started forming in the 50s.
Yeah.
And it's dying. It's dying. So, and bands are starting to control their own destiny.
And the nice thing about it is, I just want to know one thing. Why didn't they ask me to be in a focus group? They should have asked me.
I don't know. You must not have been focused enough.
There would have been problems. There would have been big problems.
They would have kicked you out of the focus group.
No doubt.
This guy does not think like everybody else. No, and that's not a bad thing, folks. It's okay to not think
Independent
like
thought
else.
is not a sin. Believe me, individual thought, especially in music, is a good thing.
Yeah.
There is so much good music. I'll never forget the quote that my wife and her brother said. When I first met my wife in 1993, and we'd been dating about 6 or 7 months. The both of them looked at me and said, I played him video and some music by Gary Moore.
Sure.
You couldn't find a better guitar player. You could find the guys as good,
Yeah,
but
he's
Gary
good.
Moore, if you haven't checked out Gary Moore, you really need to. He only made, I don't know how many hundreds of albums, blues, rock, you name it. And the two of them looked at me and said, this guy is so good, how come we never heard of him? And I said, that's why you never heard of him.
Doesn't look right.
His original record label, Orion Star, in Britain, probably could not have handled him worse. And it wasn't until he started playing blues in 1990 that he actually started making some money.
Yeah. Well, most people know who Joe Walsh is from the Eagles. They don't know about the James Gang or any of his solo stuff. And Joe Walsh is a beast, man. He is one of the best guitarists ever. And most people just say, oh, yeah, he was in the Eagles. Yeah, for like 2 albums.
Yeah.
He wasn't really, I wouldn't consider, if I was like thinking of, I don't even think of Joe Walsh when I think of the Eagles. You think of Don Henley and you think of Glenn Fry.
I think of Rocky Mountain Way and so the album So What and
Funk 49.
Yeah, and the James Gang. My old band used to play Funk 49. There was another song that they did that was innovative called Funk 48. Most people don't know what that was. You ever heard that one?
No.
Yeah, check that one out. You'll get a big kick out of it.
I saw somebody wrote one time if you play it backwards, it's Funk 94, but it's not. It's Knuff 94. I've always thought about writing a song called Knuff 94 just to see who would get the reference.
Well,
you hold it up in the mirror, it's Funk 49.
If Todd does that, I'll tell you what. Here's what we'll do, Todd.
Okay.
You want to really launch your career?
Sure.
I mean, really launch your career. Okay. You record a new album. We'll play it backwards, which you can do on Pro Tools, even easier than we used it with tape.
Yeah, I'm recording one right now. So
a bunch of Christian fundamentalist groups will say it's satanic.
Perfect.
You'll sell a ton of them.
Okay.
They'll put parental warnings all over the place. You will sell millions. Guarantee it.
But will the 18 to 35-year-old focus group, will they like me?
I don't know. I know the under 18 group will. It was true back in 1982, 83, 84, somewhere around there. A band called Wasp made an album. And I won't tell you the exact name of it, but it was something like a beast or like an animal or what? Yeah, like an animal. And there was a picture of Blackie Lawless with a saw blade in his crotch and blood running down his legs. The PMRC paraded that thing all over the United States. The original album sold 4,000 copies. When they were done, it sold 25,000 plus when they were done. They put warning labels on it, parental advisory, and it sold like mad.
Maybe I should put that on my new album, even though I don't swear on it.
Yeah.
Explicit lyrics.
Well, Todd did try with gluten-free.
I did try. I did have a gluten-free album.
You know, Todd, we could go on for 2 or 3 more hours.
We could.
And when I get back from vacation, we will go up to the 60s, which is really a lot of innovation in the 60s.
A ton of innovation. The 50s didn't have a lot of innovation other than they plugged instruments in and it got a little bit louder.
Yeah. They sort of gave it. They were the first. Every decade, as you notice, as the decade wore on, things got stale until, for example, in the 60s, which we will really get into, acid rock was the big thing, and Woodstock and everything, and that was the beginning of the end. Because the very next thing was on the doorstep, and it came in, and that was heavy metal.
Yep.
That was the next thing that replaced acid rock.
Yeah.
So, anyways, we can go on about that. Not that I would know anything about heavy metal.
I'm sure you don't know anything about it.
Or as one guy said, hard rock doesn't mean 5 blocks of granite. We'll have to do this again.
Absolutely.
I know, and I'm going to give credit to Tracy because she forced us to do this show.
She did. We've been lazy.
We want to thank Tracy for doing that, for forcing us to do this show, because we do have fun doing it.
We do.
And she engineers. Fantastic job at engineering. So many thanks to you, Tracy.
Absolutely.
We will catch you on the flip side, guys. This is Terry Difazio with my partner in crime, the incredible Todd Pronto, saying we'll catch you on the flip side. And if you got a record, we can catch you on the flip side. Have a good one.
All right.